My wife started referring to me as the last resort in front of her friends. Later, I discovered that she had begun cheating on me and hiding it. I filed for divorce. I'd never thought I'd be that guy, standing on the other side of a door, overhearing his wife's most personal conversations. But here I was, frozen in place, listening to Sarah's voice floating through the kitchen wall. My hand tightened around the doorframe as the words registered, each one hitting harder than the last. I mean, yeah, Jake's fine and all, but let's be real. He's the guy I settled with, Sarah said, her voice casual, as if she were commenting on the weather. It's not like he's the love of my life or anything. I didn't exactly have a long list of options. There was a short pause. I could hear her friend, Amber, murmur something, but the exact words were muffled. I couldn't catch it. Sarah's laughter rang out, a sound that usually softened me, but now felt like a punch to the gut. Last resort, exactly, she said, her tone mocking. At this age, what was I supposed to do? Wait around for Mr. Perfect? Jake's good enough. He's stable, has a decent job, and he isn't going anywhere. Plus, I don't need to worry about him doing something stupid. He's like a safety net. Boring but safe. I felt a surge of anger, like a physical heat creeping up my spine. My first instinct was to burst in, confront her right there in the kitchen. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was self-preservation kicking in. Instead, I just stood there, stunned, listening as she laughed again, her words replaying over and over in my mind. Last resort, boring, settled. The rest of their conversation faded into a dull background buzz as my thoughts took over. How long had she felt this way? And if I was just her last resort, what was I even doing in this marriage? As Sarah's voice faded and I heard her say goodbye to Amber, I knew I had to pull myself together. She'd be back any moment, and the last thing I wanted was for her to see me like this, angry, hurt, and a little humiliated. I forced myself to take a few deep breaths, letting the fury simmer just beneath the surface. This wasn't the time to confront her, not yet. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her words on loop. The next day, as I went through my usual morning routine, Sarah was there, bright and chatty as if nothing had happened. She even made me breakfast, asking if I had any big plans for the weekend. I wanted to laugh at the irony. Was this how she saw our relationship? Mundane, predictable? Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, gnawing at me, making me question everything. At work, my buddy Mike noticed my distraction. We'd known each other since college, and if there was one person I could trust, it was him. Over lunch, I decided to confide in him. Man, she called me her last resort, I said, feeling the words stick in my throat. Mike's eyes widened, and he let out a low whistle. That's cold, man. Really cold. You think I'm overreacting? I asked, hoping he'd tell me I was being ridiculous. But Mike shook his head. Not at all. I'd be furious. But maybe there's more to it? I mean, people say stupid things sometimes. Yeah, but this didn't feel like that, I replied, my voice tense. It was calculated, casual, even, like she didn't care if I knew. Then maybe you need to figure out why she feels that way, he suggested. Or decide if you even want to stick around to find out. His words lingered with me all day. Decide if I wanted to stick around. We'd been married 3 years. I thought we were building something. But now? Now I wasn't sure what we had at all. Later that week, things took a turn. Sarah's friend Amber invited us to a party at her place. I was tempted to make up an excuse, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see if Sarah would act differently around her friends, if there'd be more little slips or signs of her true feelings. Amber's house was crowded when we arrived. People I barely recognized greeted us, and Sarah was all smiles, laughing and mingling. She was more animated than I'd seen her in months. I hung back, nursing a drink and watching her closely. Then, a guy named Brandon, tall, with a smirk I didn't like, sauntered over to her. They started talking, laughing, and I felt my gut twist as they shared an inside joke. I could see her practically glowing under his attention, and every fiber of my being wanted to walk over and tell him to back off. But I kept my distance. After an hour of watching, Amber came over, a little tipsy, and plopped down beside me. She didn't notice my tension and just laughed, leaning in close. "Jake, you're such a good husband," she said, slurring a bit. "Honestly, most guys wouldn't put up with half of what you do." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, keeping my tone light, but feeling my pulse pick up. "Oh, come on," Amber scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "You know what Sarah's like. She's complicated. It's like she needs constant attention. I mean, don't get me wrong, she loves you. But she just gets restless." I stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. Restless? Like she's bored? Amber gave me a half smile, patting my arm. "Well, I didn't say that. But you're a safe guy, Jake. And maybe she just needs a little spark now and then." My hands clenched around my drink. "And this spark, that's supposed to be Brandon?" Amber's eyes went wide. "Oh, no, not Brandon. He's just an old friend, that's all. You know how it is." But her voice was shaky, and I wasn't convinced. After Amber walked off, I kept my eyes on Sarah and Brandon. He was leaning in close, whispering something that made her laugh and swat him on the arm. I felt my jaw tighten. This wasn't a simple friendship, and there was no way I could sit back and ignore it. When we got home, I couldn't hold back any longer. As we walked through the door, I finally let out what I'd been bottling up all week. "What was that back there with Brandon?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked taken aback, eyebrows raised. "What are you talking about?" "Don't act like you don't know. The way you were laughing, leaning in. You know what I'm talking about." Sarah sighed, rolling her eyes. "Jake, he's just an old friend. We go way back. You're making this into something it's not." Then explain Amber's little comments about you needing a spark in your life. That caught her off guard. She paused, her eyes narrowing. "So you were gossiping about me with Amber?" "She's the one who brought it up. She's the one who said I was safe for you." Sarah's face turned cold, and she crossed her arms. "You're being paranoid. Brandon's just a friend, and Amber, well, she shouldn't have said that. But if you can't handle me having friends, then maybe you're the problem here." Her words cut, but they only confirmed what I'd been feeling. After that night at Amber's, I couldn't look at Sarah the same way. Every glance, every laugh, every text she sent made me wonder what was really going on in her head. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself I was overthinking, but the more I watched her, the less convinced I was. It started with her phone. For as long as I could remember, Sarah had been pretty open about her texts and calls. She'd even leave her phone on the table or couch without a second thought. But now? Now it was like her phone had become a permanent fixture in her hand. She'd carry it from room to room, keep it face down whenever she set it down, and once, when I walked up behind her, she almost jumped, quickly swiping her screen to another app. It was subtle, but I noticed. I thought I was imagining things at first, but then it happened again and again. If I so much as glanced at her phone, she'd pull it away. And it wasn't just her phone. I noticed she started working late, claiming she was swamped with projects or needed some extra time to focus. But when I casually asked her about what projects she was working on, she'd give me vague answers like, "Oh, you wouldn't be interested. It's just boring work stuff." That was odd. Sarah had always loved sharing her work stories, usually to the point where I couldn't keep up. Now, she clammed up every time I asked. One night, I decided to test it. She was sitting across from me on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a slight smile on her face. I could see her thumb moving quickly, like she was typing a lot. I leaned over, pretending I was just reaching for the remote. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She froze for a split second before slipping into a wide smile. "Oh, just Amber. She's got some wild drama going on at work." "Really? What's up with her?" Sarah looked a little uncomfortable, but then shrugged. "Just the usual. Office politics and all that. Nothing you'd be interested in." She went back to her phone, her expression closing off. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, but she was careful not to let me see her screen again. Something was off, and I was starting to feel like an outsider in my own marriage. My suspicions kept gnawing at me. I found myself analyzing every detail, every interaction. She was leaving the house more often, too, claiming she needed some me time. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. Sarah had always been social, always had a vibrant circle of friends. But this felt different, like she was finding reasons to get away from me. Once, I casually asked where she was going, and she replied with, "Just out. Need to clear my head." She didn't offer any specifics, and when I pressed a bit, she brushed me off. A few days later, I ran into Amber at the grocery store. I hadn't seen her since the party, and part of me wondered if she knew anything I didn't. We made small talk for a minute before I brought up Sarah. "So, you guys still texting all the time?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Amber looked at me, a little confused. "Not really. We chat now and then, but it's been a busy week." "Why?" I felt a cold chill go down my spine. "Oh, I just thought." "Never mind." Amber gave me a curious look. "Is everything okay with you guys?" Yeah. I lied, trying to brush it off. Just checking in. But inside, I was anything but calm. If Sarah wasn't texting Amber, then who was she spending so much time on the phone with? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else. A few nights later, things got stranger. Sarah had gone to bed early, saying she had a headache. I stayed up, pretending to watch TV, but really, I was thinking. When I finally made my way to our room, I noticed her phone on the nightstand, face up this time. It was charging, and I could see a notification light blinking. I knew it was wrong to look, but my curiosity got the better of me. I glanced down, just for a second. The screen lit up, and there it was, a message from someone named Matt. It read, "Had a great time today. Can't wait to see you again." My heart started pounding. I'd never heard her mention anyone named Matt. Who was he? And why was she spending time with him? I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion boiling up inside me. I wanted to wake her up, confront her right there, but something held me back. I needed to know more before I acted. Over the next few days, I kept my distance, observing her closely. I noticed she'd smile at random times while looking at her phone, or she'd slip away to another room to answer a call. Each time, my suspicions grew. I decided it was time to dig a little deeper. One evening, I casually mentioned an old friend from college, Mark, and pretended to forget his name. What was his name again? Matt? Mark? She stiffened slightly. "Matt. Yeah, I don't remember any Matt from your college days." I shrugged it off, but her reaction confirmed my suspicions. She was hiding something, and it involved this Matt guy. I felt a sick sense of dread settling in my stomach. The turning point came a few days later. Sarah told me she was heading out for some girl time with Amber, and I watched as she left, barely sparing me a second glance. 10 minutes later, I decided to test a theory. I texted Amber, asking if she and Sarah were out together. Amber's response was quick. "Nope. Haven't seen her all week." "Why?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Sarah had lied, straight to my face. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what this meant. Was she meeting Matt? Was this what she'd been hiding all along? That evening, I didn't say anything when she came home. I just watched her closely, noting the way she seemed distracted, how she avoided looking me in the eye. It was becoming harder and harder to keep up the charade. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what I'd find out. The next day, I decided to reach out to an old friend, Mike, for advice. Mike and I had known each other since college, and he'd been through a messy breakup himself. If anyone could give me perspective, it was him. We met up at a bar, and after a few drinks, I laid it all out for him. The overheard conversation, the strange behavior, the text from Matt. "Sounds like she's hiding something, man," he said, shaking his head. "And if she's lying about where she's going, that's a big red flag. You gotta figure out what's going on." "But how?" I asked, frustrated. I can't exactly follow her around, and every time I try to ask her, she brushes me off. Mike paused, considering. "Look, I'm not saying you should turn into a detective, but maybe you need to do some digging. Get the facts before you confront her. Otherwise, she'll just deny it." I hated the idea of snooping, but Mike had a point. I couldn't go on like this, feeling suspicious and paranoid all the time. I needed to know the truth, even if it hurt. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I noted her routine, the times she'd leave and come back. I even kept track of the names she mentioned, seeing if there was any mention of this Matt. But Sarah was careful, almost too careful, and I could tell she was hiding something. One day, when she was in the shower, I finally gave in to the impulse. I picked up her phone, scrolling through her messages, looking for anything that would explain her behavior. And there it was, another text from Matt. Today was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. My hands were shaking as I read the words. This wasn't just a casual friend. This was something more. I felt a surge of anger, betrayal, and sadness all at once. I wanted to throw her phone across the room, to scream, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to be smart about this. That night, as we sat down to dinner, I decided to test her one more time. So, did you have a good time with Amber the other day? I asked casually, watching her closely. She barely looked up from her plate. Yeah, it was nice to catch up. Anything interesting happen? I pressed, trying to keep my tone light. Nope, just the usual, she replied, her tone dismissive. I felt a pang of anger but kept my cool. I'd caught her in a lie, but she didn't know that. She was playing me, and I needed to figure out my next move. The next day, I decided to confront Matt directly. I managed to find him on social media, and after some back-and-forth messaging, I learned he wasn't just a random acquaintance. He and Sarah had been spending time together for weeks, and judging by his messages, he had no idea she was married. That was the final straw. I was done with the lies, the secrecy, the games. I realized I couldn't keep living like this, constantly questioning, doubting, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The last few days felt like I was living in someone else's life. I kept going through the motions, work, dinner, small talk, but inside, I was a mess. My suspicion, Sarah's lies, her connection with Matt, it was all building up, pushing me to a breaking point. I couldn't pretend anymore. I needed answers. That night, I decided it was time. No more games, no more watching from the sidelines. As soon as Sarah got home from work, I braced myself. She was setting her bag down when I spoke up. Sarah, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. She looked over, slightly startled. Oh, about what? About us, I said, meeting her gaze. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Nervousness. Maybe? Guilt? I couldn't be sure, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. I've been feeling like something's wrong. Like we're drifting apart. Sarah hesitated, then walked over to the couch, sitting down and gesturing for me to join her. I sat beside her, but not too close. I didn't know what to expect, but I had a feeling this wasn't going to be easy. What's going on, Jake? She asked, her voice softer than usual. I think you know, I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. I feel like you're hiding things from me. You've been acting differently, distant, even. I can't ignore it anymore. Sarah's expression shifted, her face clouding over. She looked down at her hands, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it all. But then, to my surprise, she sighed and looked back up at me, her eyes filled with something that almost looked like regret. You're right, she said quietly. I have been distant. The words hit me harder than I expected. Hearing her admit it made everything feel painfully real. Why, Sarah? Why are you pulling away from me? Is it because of him? I could barely say the name, but she knew who I meant. She looked down, biting her lip. It's not just about Matt. It's everything. Sometimes, I feel like I rushed into this marriage, like maybe I made the wrong choice. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to react, to lash out, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to hear everything. You think you made the wrong choice? I echoed, my voice thick with emotion. Then why did you marry me in the first place? Sarah took a deep breath, looking torn. I thought I was ready. I don't know. I thought it would all just fall into place. But lately, I feel like I'm losing myself, Jake. Like I'm living a life that's not really mine. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. She felt trapped? Lost? It was hard to believe that the woman sitting beside me, the woman I'd loved for years, was questioning our entire relationship. I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. So, what are you saying? I asked, barely able to get the words out. Are you saying you don't want to be with me? I don't know, Jake, she replied, her voice trembling. I'm so confused. Sometimes I wonder if I settled. I thought I could be happy with you, and in a lot of ways, I am. But other times, I feel like I'm suffocating, like there's something missing, and I don't know if I'll ever find it. Her words hung in the air, heavy and painful. I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me, and I struggled to breathe. But we're married, Sarah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We made a commitment to each other. If you weren't sure, why did you go through with it? She looked down again, her fingers twisting together. I thought I could grow to feel more, but I guess I never really did. Hearing her say that was like a knife to the heart. I had always believed we were in this together, that we were both fully committed. But now, it was clear that while I'd been all in, she'd been holding back. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Sarah's confession left me reeling. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, analyzing every word, every detail. I found myself questioning everything. Our marriage, our time together, even myself. Had I missed the signs? Had I ignored the truth because I was so desperate to make things work? At work, I was distracted. My friend Mike noticed, of course, and after a few days of watching me mope around, he finally dragged me out for drinks. So, he said, setting his beer down with a thud, are you going to tell me what's going on? I hesitated, but I knew I needed to talk to someone. I told him everything, about Sarah's confession, her doubts, everything. Mike shook his head, looking genuinely shocked. Man, that's rough. I'm sorry, but what are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to fight for this, but another part of me, I feel betrayed. Like I've been living a lie. Mike sighed. Look, maybe you need to give her some space. Figure out what she really wants. If she's not all in, you deserve to know. His words made sense, but it didn't make the situation any easier. I went home that night, my mind racing. How could I give her space when we lived together, when every part of my life was tied to hers? Over the next few weeks, things were tense between Sarah and me. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was mostly small talk. I felt like a stranger in my own home, and it was killing me. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes, a strange look in her eyes, like she was feeling guilty or conflicted. But whenever I tried to talk to her, she'd shut down, retreating into herself. One night, after another long, silent dinner, I finally broke. Sarah, we can't keep going on like this, I said, my voice raw. We need to make a decision. Either we work on this or we go our separate ways. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. I know, Jake. I've been thinking about it too. There was a long pause as we both struggled to find the right words. I don't want to hurt you, she said softly. You're a good man, Jake. Better than I deserve. But maybe we just weren't meant to be. Her words felt like a punch to the gut, but deep down, I knew she was right. We tried to force something that maybe wasn't meant to happen. The days after our last conversation were a blur of uncomfortable silences and forced smiles. Sarah and I were two strangers living under the same roof, careful to avoid each other's gaze, as though the slightest glance would unravel what little was left of our relationship. I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch, something that could be fixed. But deep down, I knew things had changed, perhaps irreparably. At first, I tried to keep the peace. I tried to be patient, giving Sarah the space she claimed she needed. I busied myself with work, kept conversations light, even slept on the couch a few nights to give her some space. But every time I glanced over at her, I saw someone distant, someone whose mind was a million miles away. And it didn't take long for me to start feeling the weight of it all. The silence, the avoidance, the feeling of being unwanted. One evening, I came home late from work, hoping that maybe by giving her some extra time alone, she'd come around, or maybe even start a real conversation. Instead, when I opened the door, I found her on the phone, laughing, a carefree laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. She looked up when she noticed me, and her laughter died immediately. The tension in the room was palpable. Who were you talking to? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, putting her phone face down on the table. Just an old friend, she said vaguely. An old friend, I repeated, not bothering to hide my skepticism. Is this old friend also helping you figure things out? She sighed, clearly exasperated. Jake, I told you I need space. I can't figure things out if you keep questioning me like this. I'm not questioning you, Sarah. I'm trying to understand what's going on. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you've already made up your mind and are just waiting for the right moment to tell me. Her face softened, and for a second, I thought she might actually open up. But then she looked away, her expression closed off again. I don't know, Jake. Maybe I have already checked out. I don't know what I feel anymore. That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't live like this, constantly questioning, always feeling like I was one step away from losing her. I needed clarity, and if she couldn't give it to me, I had to find it myself. The next morning, I reached out to an attorney, not because I was ready to file for divorce, but because I needed to know my options. Her name was Lisa, a practical, no-nonsense woman in her 40s with a reputation for being tough but fair. I sat in her office, feeling more vulnerable than I'd ever felt, as I explained my situation. So, you're saying she's emotionally withdrawn? Lisa asked, jotting down notes. And there may or may not be someone else involved? I nodded, feeling the weight of the words as I said them. I don't know for sure. I just know she's not here anymore. It feels like I'm just living with a ghost of the person I married. Lisa nodded sympathetically. Jake, I understand how difficult this is. But if she's emotionally checked out, and if you feel like you've done all you can, maybe it's time to consider what you want. You don't have to rush into anything, but knowing your options might give you some peace of mind. I left her office feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Knowing I had options felt like a weight had been lifted, but the idea of ending things with Sarah felt unbearable. That night, I tried one last time to reach her. We were sitting at opposite ends of the couch, the TV playing in the background, but neither of us was paying attention. I took a deep breath and turned to her. Sarah, I started, feeling my heart race. I went to see an attorney today. She froze, her eyes widening slightly. What? Why? Because I can't keep living like this, I said, the words tumbling out. I feel like I'm constantly guessing, constantly waiting for you to decide if you want to be with me. I need to know if there's any hope left here, or if I'm just holding on to something that's already over. She looked down, avoiding my gaze. I told you I need time, Jake. This isn't something I can just decide overnight. How much time, Sarah? I asked, my voice breaking. Because it feels like you're not trying to figure things out. You're just stringing me along while you make up your mind. And I can't keep waiting for you to decide if I'm worth it. She looked up at me then, and I could see the sadness in her eyes. I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I don't know how to explain it. I care about you, but maybe not in the way I should. That was it, the final confirmation. She didn't say it outright, but I knew what she meant. She didn't love me, not the way I loved her. And hearing it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The next few weeks were a blur of awkward silences, sleepless nights, and forced small talk. We started discussing the logistics, who would stay in the house, how we would split things up. Every conversation felt like a wound reopening. Sarah kept saying she wanted to do this amicably, but there was nothing amicable about tearing apart a life we'd built together. One weekend, I finally decided to pack up some things and stay with Mike for a few days. I couldn't bear the thought of watching Sarah pack up her things, so I figured it was best to give her some space. Mike welcomed me with open arms, a beer in hand, and a sympathetic look in his eyes. I'm sorry, man, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. But maybe this is for the best. It's better to be alone than with someone who doesn't appreciate you. I nodded, but the words felt hollow. I knew he was right, but it didn't make the pain any easier. After I moved out, the days felt like they were dragging on in some surreal, painful blur. I was still trying to adjust to life without Sarah, going back and forth between sadness and anger. Some mornings, I would wake up and almost reach out to call her, forgetting that things were over. It felt unnatural to not be with her, like I was missing a part of myself. I had packed up most of my things and started staying with Mike, who, thankfully, was a solid friend throughout the whole mess. Despite the pain, I knew I'd made the right decision. I was tired of waiting, tired of being strung along. And if Sarah couldn't give me her whole heart, I wasn't going to keep giving her mine. But as much as I tried to tell myself I was moving on, there was still a nagging feeling, a suspicion that I couldn't shake. One evening, a few weeks after the separation, I was sitting in the living room with Mike. We were watching some action movie, but I could barely focus on the screen. My mind kept drifting back to Sarah, wondering if she'd ever really loved me or if I'd been blind to her feelings all along. Just as I was about to get up and grab another beer, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from an old friend, Jason, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, Jake. I know this is random, but did you and Sarah split up? I thought I saw her out with someone the other night. Just wanted to check in." My heart sank. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at the message, reading it over and over. Out with someone? Was it just a friend? Or had she already moved on? I tried to keep my cool, responding with a simple, "Yeah, we split." "Where did you see her?" Jason replied almost immediately. "At that new wine bar downtown. She was with some guy. Looked pretty cozy if I'm being honest." "Sorry, man." I put my phone down, feeling a mix of anger and hurt. Cozy? With some guy? We hadn't even officially filed for divorce yet, and she was already out with someone else. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it didn't matter anymore. We were done, and she was free to do whatever she wanted. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I had spent years with this woman, loving her, trusting her, and now it felt like none of it mattered. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about Jason's message. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Sarah with some faceless guy, laughing, smiling, the way she used to smile with me. It was torture. I found myself replaying old conversations, trying to figure out if there had been signs, if I had missed something all along. One evening, I decided to confront my suspicions. I reached out to Amber, Sarah's friend, who had always been a little too eager to share details about Sarah's life. I wasn't sure she'd tell me anything, but it was worth a shot. I texted her, asking if she wanted to meet up for coffee, making it seem like I just needed someone to talk to. Amber agreed, and we met at a quiet cafe downtown. She seemed surprised to see me but greeted me warmly, giving me a sympathetic look. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "I'm all right, just trying to understand what happened, you know?" She nodded, sipping her coffee. "I get it. Breakups are never easy. I was honestly shocked when I heard you two split. You guys always seemed so solid." I forced a bitter smile. "Yeah, well, I thought so too. But now I'm starting to wonder if there was more going on than I realized." Amber's eyes flickered with something, a brief flash of guilt or hesitation. I seized the moment, leaning in slightly. "Amber, I just need to know," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Was there someone else? Was Sarah seeing someone while we were still together?" Amber shifted uncomfortably, looking down at her coffee. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then she sighed, giving me a resigned look. "Jake, I don't know if I should be the one telling you this, but yeah, there was someone else. His name's Matt. They met a few months ago, through some mutual friends." The room spun. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, but I kept my face calm, nodding slowly as I absorbed the information. So it was true. Matt wasn't just some random friend. He was someone she'd been seeing while we were still married. "How long?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Amber hesitated, looking torn. "I think it started a few months before you two split." She was confused, Jake. I'm not saying it was right, but she was going through a lot. Her words felt like empty excuses, but I just nodded, unable to process the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Anger, betrayal, sadness, they all mixed together, creating a heavy knot in my chest. After that conversation, I felt like I was in free fall. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and Matt, replaying every moment of our marriage, wondering how long she'd been lying to me. The worst part was that I had trusted her, had believed that we could work things out, even after everything. But now, knowing the truth, I felt like a fool. The following weekend, I saw Sarah. She came by to drop off some things I had left behind. A cardboard box filled with random items from our life together. She seemed nervous, almost guilty, as she handed me the box. Thanks, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I didn't want her to see how much I was hurting, didn't want to give her the satisfaction. Jake, she started, her voice soft. I know this is hard, but I hope we can still be civil. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at her, feeling a surge of anger bubbling up. You never wanted to hurt me? Sarah, you were seeing someone else while we were still married. Did you think that wouldn't hurt me? She looked taken aback, her face paling slightly. I didn't think you knew. Yeah, well, I do now, I replied, my voice cold. And all this time, I thought we were just going through a rough patch, that maybe we could work things out. But you were already gone, weren't you? She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. But things just happened. I didn't mean for it to get so complicated. Complicated? I echoed, feeling the bitterness in my throat. You lied to me. You betrayed me. That's not complicated. That's just wrong. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I never wanted it to end like this. I did care about you, Jake. But not enough, I said, my voice breaking. Not enough to be honest with me. Not enough to stay. There was a long silence between us, the weight of everything left unsaid hanging in the air. Finally, she nodded, wiping away a tear. I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone now. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there, holding the box of memories she'd left behind, feeling a strange sense of finality. I had thought that after Sarah left with her box of memories, it was finally over. I was ready to start putting myself back together, to leave behind all the lies, the betrayal, and the broken promises. But just when I was starting to feel a sliver of peace, she came back, knocking on my door as if nothing had happened. It had been about 2 months since we last spoke, and I was finally starting to find a sense of stability. I'd thrown myself into work, reconnected with friends, and even started going to the gym again. The pain was still there, but it was dulling, like a scar slowly fading. So when I opened the door and saw Sarah standing there, looking exhausted, her face red and puffy from crying, I felt an odd mix of anger and pity. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, but another part of me, a part one was ashamed of, was curious to hear what she had to say. Jake, she began, her voice trembling. I know this is the last thing you want, but can we talk? I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. What's there left to talk about, Sarah? You made your choice. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. I know, and I know I have no right to ask for your time. But please, just hear me out. I don't know who else to turn to. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in, feeling a sense of unease settle over me. She walked past me, glancing around the living room as if trying to gather her thoughts. Finally, she sat down on the couch, wringing her hands as she looked up at me with pleading eyes. I made a mistake, Jake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I wanted something else, that maybe I'd find happiness somewhere else. But it was a lie. I raised an eyebrow, refusing to let her off the hook that easily. So now you realize that? After everything you put me through? She looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. Yes, I see now how wrong I was. Matt, he wasn't who I thought he was. He betrayed me, and I realized that I gave up the one person who truly cared about me. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. So, what? You come crawling back because he hurt you, and now I'm supposed to just forgive and forget? Her face crumpled, and she started to cry. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I hurt you, and if I could go back and change everything, I would. But I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. I stared at her, feeling an unexpected sense of satisfaction at her tears, but it was mixed with a deep sadness. I had loved this woman, trusted her, and she had thrown it all away for some fleeting fantasy. And now, when her new life hadn't worked out, she wanted me to pick up the pieces. I appreciate the apology, Sarah, I said slowly, but it doesn't change anything. You made me feel like I was nothing more than a backup plan. The last resort, remember? She winced at the words, nodding miserably. I know, and I hate myself for saying that. It wasn't fair to you. I was stupid and selfish. Yeah, you were, I replied, feeling a weight lift as I spoke the words out loud. But here's the thing, Sarah. I deserve better. I deserve someone who doesn't question if I'm good enough for them. I deserve someone who actually wants to be with me. She reached out, her hand trembling. Jake, please. I know I messed up, but I've realized that you're the one I want. I was scared, and I made a mistake. Please, can we try again? I shook my head, pulling back. No, Sarah, we can't. I don't trust you anymore, and I can't be with someone who made me feel like I was the consolation prize. The words seemed to hit her hard. She looked devastated, but I felt no satisfaction. This was the end, and while it hurt, it also felt like freedom. Part 7. The final step. After Sarah left, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The door was closed, literally and figuratively, and I was finally free to move on. I realized that the pain, the betrayal, all of it was just a stepping stone to something better. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself, rebuilding my life piece by piece. I reconnected with friends, picked up old hobbies, and even started dating casually again. It felt strange at first, but it was liberating to know that I could choose my own path, free from the weight of a relationship that had never truly been equal. Looking back, I realized that I had been holding on to an illusion. I had wanted so badly for things to work out with Sarah that I had ignored all the signs, all the little moments that showed she wasn't fully committed. But now, I understood that I deserved more. I deserved someone who would choose me without hesitation, someone who would see me as more than just a backup plan.